硬件光线追踪是一种简单而强大的实时增强游戏和图形演示视觉效果的方法。Imagination 图形技术美工专家 Alekos Caporali 将以从业者的角度分析这些功能的技术实现、工作流程和优点，为大家带来他的分享：手游中光线追踪的实现。
Hello everyone, I'm Alekos Caporali and I'm graphics technical artist for the demo team at Imagination Technologies. The purpose of this session is to show you how close we are at Imagination Technologies at getting ray tracing in your pockets. We made big progress towards achieving ray tracing on mobile, so during this presentation I will showcase how powerful ray tracing is in terms of the visual enhancement that it provides in a mobile-friendly game environment, and I will demonstrate how easy it is to implement some of its features from an artist's point of view. But first, let me give a bit of context for anyone that might not be familiar with Imagination Technologies and what we do before we get into it. Imagination Technologies has been designing GPUs, among other things, for the past 30 years. Our technology has ranged from mobile devices to desktop to automotive and many other applications. For example, we've also been in consoles, and for the old school gamers out there, you might remember us for one of my favorite consoles of all time, which is the Sega Dreamcast. All this experience has given us the opportunity to pioneer hardware ray tracing research since 2007, and today we are leaders in the mobile GPU space and in mobile hardware ray tracing. But not all ray tracing hardware is the same, and there are several points to consider when evaluating the performances of different solutions. That's why, in order to help identify the different levels of ray tracing capabilities in modern hardware, we've come up with a chart. The key point of the chart is that as we move up each level, there is an increased focus on efficiency. However, the market does not always move based on efficiency, and for example, the recently released second generation of ray tracing capable desktop PC hardware has increased the performances by simply providing more ray tracing processing, which naturally requires more silicon area and more power. However, this brute force approach is not a viable option for solutions that need to operate within a power budget such as mobile. Today, I'm not going in detail about all the levels shown here, but what you need to know is that level 0 and 1 are older solutions that are rarely seen anymore, and they were the solution that kickstarted ray tracing. Level 2 and 3 are the most popular types, usually software-based, of ray tracing being used nowadays. And finally, and these are the two levels that we will concentrate on today, there is level 4, which is the bounding volume hierarchy processing with coherency sorting hardware, which is the best implementation of mobile hardware ray tracing at the present time, and it's the hardware ray tracing in Imagination GPUs. Then there is level 5, which is an even more advanced system developed by Imagination Technologies and showcased for the first time in 2016 with the PowerVR GR6500 test board, where also the BVH processing is sorted with a dedicated solution in hardware, and this is even more efficient. To summarize, with these last two levels that I just described, Imagination found a system that increases the efficiency based on the way that rays that have a coherence bouncing angle on a surface are sorted together, hence the name coherency sorting. And this technology, optimizing the whole ray sort process in an intelligent way, puts less stress on the hardware, and this makes it very suitable for mobile solutions. So, after giving you a bit of introduction of what we do at Imagination Technologies, here's the agenda for the remainder of the session. We've split the presentation into two parts. I will firstly walk you through our full ray tracing implementation demo, explaining some of the features that made it possible. After that, I will give you some tips on how to create game-ready ray-traced assets. Then, in the second part, I will showcase our most recent ray tracing related demo, built entirely using a game engine named RTGI, which allows to easily implement real-time ray-traced global illumination. Finally, I will get you through the different steps that will allow you to first understand the RTGI feature, and then be able to make it work inside the game engine. So, how did we implement ray tracing in our previous demos? Again, the first demo that I'm going to play is something that we developed at Imagination in order to showcase a full ray tracing implementation in a mobile-friendly game environment, obviously with optimized feature for mobile performance budget. This demo is running on our internal engine. For those of you who are not familiar with the concept of ray tracing, well, ray tracing is a game-changing 3D graphics technology that imitates how light behaves in the real world, and what we're going to see is simply a demonstration of its capabilities. So let's watch it together right now. This demo is available online and on our YouTube channel, both in the version of a cinematic video and as a featured showcase, so feel free to check it out if you want to have another look at it afterwards. But now let me guide you through what you've just seen in the demo. We developed it in 2020-2021 and it's implementing most of the features available with ray tracing at a mobile budget. Here in the image you can see a summary of them. First of all, you can notice that surfaces offer realistic reflections depending on their material, and this is highlighted in the red box. In the green box, you can see that hard-edged rasterized shadows are replaced with ray-traced soft shadows, and this adds a lot to the realism of the scenes. Finally, in the yellow box, you have an example of how environmental light is helped by global illumination, real-time global illumination, in order to give a better and more realistic result in line with what happens in real life. So now we have an understanding of the main features that ray tracing is capable to provide, but what does it mean for us artists and developers out there that wants to implement this kind of features? Which are the needed changes to our asset creation workflow that allows to correctly visualize the assets inside the ray trace enable engine? And most importantly, is that difficult to do? Well, the good news is that the process is almost identical to the one that we're all used to, only with some additional attention to a couple details in order to prevent some annoying artifacts that ray tracing may cause. But I'll explain myself better later. Right now, what I want to talk about is model optimization. Ray tracing performances obviously also depends on the complexity of the scene and the complexity of the models. So what you need to be careful about when getting to modeling is, first of all, keeping a low polygon count and manage the topology to be clean and balanced depending on the amount of detail that you really need on the mesh. Then use the smoothing groups to allow the correct normal projection over the low poly edges. Finally, space your UV island to prevent color bleeding, and in case you need, you can overlap them to save on texture resolution. These are all general tips, but everything together, in conjunction with a good high poly sculpt, will make your asset ready to receive perfectly baked maps when getting to texturing it, and this is critical to make it look good also inside a ray tracing enabled engine. The second set of topics is something that goes a little bit more in depth with the technical implementation of the features. For example, animations. Especially camera animations, they work better when moving slowly inside a ray traced environment. This is because the denoiser for ray traced shadows and ray traced reflections needs some time to converge usually. Finally, I want to talk about the approach that you need to take when generating texture for PBR materials, and the workflow is the same that we're all used to, but you will need to take care a little bit more about metallic values and roughness values. to prevent unwanted noise from ray traced reflections. Also, in the topics of material, and specifically for ray traced global illumination, some engines require you to set an irradiance color value for the material so that this value will be used by the GUI probes to diffuse the right colors from the material itself. So if you don't do that, you may not see the GUI work in the right way. In Open3D Engine, you can find the irradiance value at the bottom of your material setting, where you can set both its color and its intensity value. That's all you need to take care in order to implement ray tracing from the point of view of an artist. What I want to do next instead is getting more in detail about one of the features that I showcased in the previous demo that we will see implemented inside one of the modern engines available nowadays. I'm talking about real-time ray-traced global illumination. To do that, I will use our most recent demo, developed inside Open3D Engine, also known as O3D. Let's have a look at the demo together. Okay, this demo was called Buongiorno, and it's the most recent graphic demo about ray tracing implementation that we developed at Imagination Technologies. It is essentially the stylized representation of an Italian-like village, a small Italian village, which main purpose is to showcase how global illumination works in real time using ray tracing. If you want to take another look at the demo, feel free to visit our YouTube channel where the video is available. But now let's have a look at the feature description together. And the main ways RTGI helps enhancing the environment lighting are essentially two. First of all, it diffuses color to the surrounding geometry in real time when materials and objects changes or moves inside the scene. You can see that happening in the red boxes. Also, it helps the local light conditions to appear more natural depending on how much light is bouncing from the surrounding objects. You can have a look at the features again while they take place in real time inside the game engine viewport. RTGI is one of the easiest ray tracing implementations in game engines and also one of the less intensive in terms of ray usage. But as you can see, it provides a big step up in the general look of mobile video games. The final bit of presentation, after showing you how the feature looks, is about getting a little bit more in detail about how RTGI works. And I will also show you how easy it is to implement it inside a modern game engine. I will do that in O3D, the same game engine that we use for this demo. So, something that we need to do before getting to know how to set and activate the feature is actually understanding what really ray traced global illumination is and how it works, both in real life and in the engine. I will start by saying that global illumination in general is not a new system in game engines, and we regularly see global illumination implemented as a single baked instance, but a real novelty about new game engines, and this is possible to do only thanks to ray tracing, is to compute the global illumination system in real time. With RTGI, this system becomes completely dynamic and it reacts to light, geometry and material changes that happens in real time inside the scene. In the video here you can see the global illumination adapting in real time to material changes inside the engine viewport. It is important to mention that RTGI's purpose is to reproduce a real-life physical phenomenon, where the light bouncing from an object is naturally and dynamically diffused to other objects in the nearby. With a simple demonstration video I can easily show you how it works in the real world. You will be able to see that if I take my phone torch and if I aim it straight to a blue object, the light that gets diffused from that object is colored with a blue tint. On the other side, when I use a red object, the diffused light is colored with a red tint. Let's have a look at it again and notice the differences between the light diffused by the first and the second object. Now, how does a game engine try to achieve the same result in a software using ray tracing? Well, it uses diffusion probes. Essentially, the scene is filled with a grid of probes and ray tracing casts hundreds of rays around each probe. Diffusion probes detect where the rays intersect with the nearby geometry, and starting from this information they produce an irradiance texture that they project back to the geometry, spreading light intensity and color. This happens all across the scene, where the probes are activating and deactivating in real time for optimization purposes depending on where the active geometry is. Now let's talk about the way this system helps improving the realism of your environment light. RTGI has several benefits. In O3D, the dynamic GI can take into account more than one light source at a time, inside the same scene, obviously. It can be computed in real time for those of you provided of ray tracing, or baked as a regular GI. And finally, it's very cheap in terms of active rays, so it doesn't require a high budget to work correctly. Another thing that I should add is that it's very easy to implement as well. So how do we do that? In O3D, what you need to do is go into your level and add the new component, which is the diffused global illumination. Straight away, you can set the quality of this system, and I will go for medium. Then you can create a new entity or a new object, which will be the container for the global illumination. And I will rename it GI indeed. To this entity, you will need to add a new component, which is the diffuse probe grid, and it will determine the grid of probes inside the environment. But this doesn't work without the definition of the boundaries. So I will add a new cube as a definition, and I will set the dimensions of the cube and the position of the cube in the 3D space. And this should actually be enough to start visualizing the global illumination. So, for example, if I go to the global illumination and I deactivate it, and I activate it back, you can see that it takes place. Other things you can play with is go into your light source, for example, and start decreasing or increasing the intensity, and the global illumination will react in real time. Otherwise, you can grab your light and move it more next to the blue object or to the red wall to see more blue or red diffusion. Also, as I already showed before, you can grab a new material and change it with the blue wall to see a new color diffusion from the wall. And essentially, this is it. Everything else that you need to do is go into your GI. You can now activate the visualization of the probes, and maybe we can start distributing them a little bit better inside the environment. So I will go for 1.5 meter and 1.5 meter spacing. Then finally, you can set the biases, and you can set the number of rays for each probe. I will go for 144 to have the feature optimized. I can deactivate the probes, and this is essentially everything you need to do to activate GI inside a game engine like O3D. So that was it. You are now able to understand the basic functioning of RTGI, and eventually you know how to implement it inside a new game engine in order to enhance the visuals of your mobile video games in very few simple steps. But what is coming next for you, and what is coming next for Imagination Technologies? Well, I should mention that this kind of ray tracing enabled system are something that both developers and artists are still fully discovering, but this technology and the related knowledges are starting to become more and more accessible to all of us, luckily. We at Imagination are really pushing ray tracing to be soon in your pockets, available in mobile devices, but also thanks to presentation like this, we have the big opportunity to make you more curious and knowledgeable about the technology and how to use it. Thinking that in the near future, gamers, but obviously also artists, developers and engineers will be allowed to use and enjoy this kind of technology thanks to our effort in providing ray tracing enabled GPU solutions for the mobile market and teaching you how to use it is something that makes us really proud. So, we really look forward to it because what we see for the mobile gaming industry is a bright future. Or I should say, a ray traced future. So, thank you so much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. But before we go, it's finally time for some Q&A. So, it's finally time for some Q&A, and I will try to give an exhaustive answer to some of the questions that we received. The first question is, are the demos recorded while running on the real mobile hardware? So, for the main purpose of recording demos, they're currently running on desktop. Anyway, we run internal simulations against our drivers in order to get an idea of what are the expected performances for the mobile hardware. So we specifically developed the demos to be optimized for that kind of performances. This is because the mobile hardware is still not physically in our end to make tests on it, but the Q3 of next year is a good provision of when we will be able to do it. The second question is, which software did you use in the team to produce your asset for the demos? So, in the demo team at Imagination Technologies, we have access to very common softwares to produce game-ready assets for the demos. And for the modeling pipeline, the sculpting, rigging, and animation, we use Blender. Then we have access to the Adobe suite, so we bake our maps and author our texture in both Substance Designer or Substance Painter. And finally, for building the environments and setting the scenes, running the demos, we use different engines, obviously, depending on what kind of feature we need to showcase. In general, the one that we use the most are Unity or 3D or our internal engine in case we need to showcase something ray tracing related. The third question is the first demo using ray tracing pipelines or ray queries? Well, that's a very good question, first of all, very technical. And so the demo is using ray tracing pipelines because it's running on desktop. Anyway, when running on mobile, it's recommended to use ray queries. Imagination ray tracing hardware will support both queries and pipelines, so both options will be available depending on the performances required. And if the visuals don't incur in a heavy performance hit, using ray tracing pipelines shouldn't be an issue. However, at this point in time, we will need more performance metrics in order to define the best practices for our hardware. So that was it. Thank you so much for your questions. I hope I've been clear enough at answering them and eventually at providing you with some more information about what we do at Imagination Technologies and how ray tracing works. And I'm Alekos Caporali, graphics technical artist for Imagination Technologies, and I'll see you next time.